On April 16, 1945, the Soviet Union launched the final assault on Berlin. 2.5 million Soviet soldiers advanced on the German capital from the east. The city's defenders, exhausted Wehrmacht troops, Volkssturm militia, and teenage boys pressed into service, numbered fewer than 300,000. It was the last major battle of the Second World War in Europe. The fall of Berlin had been inevitable since the failure of the Ardennes offensive in December 1944. By early 1945, Allied forces were advancing from the west, while Soviet armies swept through Poland and eastern Germany. The question was not whether Berlin would fall, but who would take it. Stalin was determined that the Red Army would be first. He drove his commanders hard, creating a race between Marshal Zhukov on the Central Axis and Marshal Konov from the south. The assault began with the largest artillery bombardment in history. Over 40,000 Soviet guns fired simultaneously along the Oder River front. The noise was audible hundreds of miles away. The Silo Heights, the last major defensive line before Berlin, held for 3 days before collapsing under the weight of men and steel. The cost was enormous. Soviet casualties at the Silo Heights alone exceeded 30,000 men. As Soviet forces entered the outskirts of Berlin, the fighting became street by street, building by building. Soviet tanks moved cautiously through rubble-choked streets, while infantry cleared each floor of each building by hand. The Germans had prepared the city for urban warfare. Every intersection was a potential kill zone. Soviet soldiers called it the most dangerous fighting of the entire war. For the defenders, it was a fight to the death. Hitler had declared that Berlin would be defended to the last man, and his generals obeyed. In the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, Hitler refused to face reality until almost the very end. He issued orders to armies that no longer existed. He blamed his generals for betrayal. On April 29, he married Eva Braun. The next day, April 30, with Soviet troops less than a kilometer away, Adolf Hitler shot himself. Eva Braun took cyanide. Their bodies were burned in the Chancellery garden. The fighting continued for 2 more days after Hitler's death. Grand Admiral Dönitz, designated Hitler's successor, ordered German forces to continue resisting in the east while seeking surrender in the west, a desperate attempt to allow German civilians and soldiers to flee Soviet captivity. On May 2, General Helmuth Weidling, the German commander of Berlin, surrendered the city. The last shots in Berlin fell silent. The cost of the Battle of Berlin was staggering. The Soviet Union suffered over 80,000 soldiers killed. German military dead numbered in the hundreds of thousands, though precise figures were never established. Civilian casualties in Berlin are estimated at around 125,000. The city itself was a ruin, approximately a third of its buildings destroyed, much of the rest heavily damaged. The fall of Berlin ended Nazi Germany's capacity to wage war. Within a week, on May 8, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. 6 years of industrialized slaughter, 50 million dead, an entire continent destroyed, and in the end, it came down to Soviet soldiers fighting through the rubble of a city that Hitler had planned to rebuild as the capital of a 1,000-year empire. Berlin was rebuilt. It was divided for 44 years by a wall. And in 1990, it became the capital of a reunified, democratic Germany. The city that witnessed the final collapse of the Nazi regime became, in time, a symbol of European reconciliation. But the ruins of April 1945 are still visible if you know where to look. History does not vanish entirely. It only recedes.